November 29th, 1944. The largest warship ever built, a 72,000-ton armored fortress, is capsizing on its maiden voyage. It wasn't sunk by a carrier fleet. It was killed by a single submarine, and a fatal, unfinished secret, November 28th, 1944, 18 hours, Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, Japan. The air is cold, sharp with the taste of salt and welding smoke. Inside the cavernous dry dock number 6, under a hastily built camouflage of timber and netting, a secret that weighs 72,000 tons is stirring to life. This is not just a ship, it is a ghost. It is hull number 110, the third child of the Yamato-class, the most powerful battleships ever conceived. But the Battle of Midway, the funeral pyre of Japanese naval aviation, changed its destiny. Before its keel was even fully laid, the Imperial Japanese Navy, desperate for carriers, ordered a radical conversion. The result is Shinano. On its massive armored flight deck strong enough to withstand a 500-kilogram bomb, Captain Toshio Abe stands against the railing. The vibration of the ship's newly lit boilers hums through the soles of his boots. Abe, a veteran of the unsinkable destroyer Yukikaze, feels the immense alien scale of his new command. At 872 feet long and displacing more than any warship ever built, Shinano is a mobile fortress, a symbol of Japan's defiant, desperate ingenuity. But Abe knows a terrible secret. The fortress is hollow. His crew is not a crew. They are a collection of 2,500 men, shipyard workers still carrying their tools, skeleton crews pulled from other units, and young cadets who have barely smelled sea air. They are strangers to each other and, more dangerously, they are strangers to the ship. Down in the steel canyons of the hull, the ship's true nature is hidden. Shinano is dangerously, fatally unfinished. Massive watertight compartments, designed to contain the ocean itself, have gaskets that have never been properly seated. Critical doors have never been air pressure tested. The welds along the anti-torpedo blister the very armor that should protect its vitals, are suspect, rushed by civilian laborers working under impossible deadlines. Many of the pumps that would be needed to fight a flood are not yet installed, and the ones that are, well, the crew hasn't been trained to use them. This voyage is not a combat patrol, it is an escape. Abe has his orders. The Americans are coming. A single B-29 snooper reconnaissance plane spotted the unfinished Leviathan just days ago. Yokosuka is now a confirmed target. Shinano must flee south to the relative safety of Kure Naval Base, where it can be properly completed, where its armor can be reinforced and its untested systems finalized. At 1830, the massive steel caisson of the dry dock groans open. Black, oily water from Tokyo Bay floods in, and for the first time, Shinano floats. Tugs pull the giant from its lair. It moves with a terrifying, clumsy inertia. On the bridge, Abe gives the order. The ship's 4 massive screws bite the water. Accompanying him are 3 destroyers, his eyes Isokaze, Hamakaze, and Abe's old command, the lucky Yukikaze. They are his screen against the one thing that haunts him more than the B-29 seconds, American submarines. His superiors have assured him the route is safe. It has been swept. The Americans, they say, are not this close to the homeland. As Shinano clears the Sagami Nada Seabuoy and enters the black, open waters of the Pacific, the ship's internal telephones are already chaotic. Shipyard workers, now passengers, are huddled in compartments, miserably seasick. Cadets, new to their posts, struggle to read gauges in the dim red light of battle stations. Captain Abe wants speed. Speed is safety. He orders the ship to 20 knots. He does not know that this decision to run fast and straight in the dark is the worst one he could possibly make. He also doesn't know that 12 miles high, an American radar operator on a different B-29 has just seen a new, massive blip on his screen, tracking southeast. And far below, in the cold black water, a predator has just heard the rhythmic, powerful pulse of Shinano's turbines. November 28th, 1944, 20:48 hours. 100 nautical miles southeast of Honshu, The stale, diesel-thick air inside the USS Archerfish, SS-311, is electric. Commander Joseph F. Enright, a man desperate to prove both his boat and himself after a string of unremarkable patrols, is hunched over the radar hood. For the past 2 hours, his radarman, Bill F. The crew joked his middle names were F. in Fessenden, had been tracking an impossible contact. It was huge. Too huge. The pip on the screen suggested a target larger than the Ile-de-France, the ocean liner Enright had seen before the war. He'd initially dismissed it as a radar-deceiving mountain range on an island. But this island was moving, and it was moving fast, too, 0 knots. It can't be. Enright muttered, his eyes straining in the green glow. Nothing the Japs have moves that fast unless it's a battle wagon, and no battle wagon is this big. Archerfish was on the surface, its engines screaming at full power, charging through the rough seas. The submarine was shuddering, saltwater spray lashing the conning tower. They were on a life-or-death patrol, assigned to lifeguard duty for B-29 seconds flying to Tokyo. This contact was pure, dumb luck. Or was it? At 21:40, the radio room crackled to life. It was a Z-Signala high-priority flash message from the B-29 that had spotted Shinano earlier. The message was concise. Large target, possibly a carrier, escaping Yokosuka. Last position. Enright stared at the decoded message. His mountain was real, and it was a carrier. "Get me a new plot," he yelled. "He's ours." The chase was on, but it was a losing one. Archerfish, even on the surface at its maximum 19 knots, was slower than its prey. The target was pulling away. Enright's frustration was palpable. He had found the prize of a lifetime, only to watch it disappear over the horizon. Aboard Shinano, the atmosphere was one of confused urgency. The ship was still running at 20 knots. Lookouts, their eyes watering in the wind, peered nervously into the blackness. They were looking for planes, not submarines. Suddenly, at 22:45, the port lookout on the destroyer Isakaze screamed. A dark shape, low in the water. A submarine. On Shinano's bridge, alarms blared. Captain Abe, startled, looked at the plot. The contact was on his port bow. Standard doctrine was clear. Turn away from the threat, present the ship's stern, and let the destroyers handle the hunter. But Abe hesitated. His ship was a fortress. His orders were to get to Kure, fast. He made a fatal calculation. He believed Shinano's speed and armor were enough. He also, perhaps, overestimated his destroyer screen. He gave the order, a sharp turn, to starboard. It was a disastrous, inexplicable maneuver. Instead of running away, Shinano was cutting across the Archerfish's bow. The turn was sharp. On the flight deck, unsecured equipment and materials shifted dangerously. Down below, the skeleton crew in the engine room fought to control the sudden change in steam pressure. Aboard Archerfish, Enright watched the target's running lights change. He couldn't believe his eyes. He's turning towards us, the exec whispered, his binoculars trained on the massive, dark shape that now filled the horizon. The target wasn't just turning towards them. It was presenting its full, massive, 8-7, 2-foot-long beam. It was the perfect target, a textbook firing solution. Enright's frustration evaporated, replaced by ice-cold focus. This was no longer a chase. It was an execution. "Down the hatch," he ordered. "Flood the tubes. We are going in." The Archerfish dove, its hull groaning as it slipped beneath the waves. In the control room, illuminated by the dim red glow of the gauges, the only sound was the steady ping, ping, ping of the sonar and the calm, steady voice of Commander Enright calling out the bearings. Set torpedoes for a 10-foot depth, spread of 6, bow tubes. He was aiming for the center of that enormous, unbelievable mass. November 29th, 1944, 3:15 hours. Depth, 60 feet. Inside the Archerfish, the air was so thick you could taste the adrenaline. Commander Enright had his eye pressed to the periscope, his knuckles white. The massive black wall of the carrier filled his vision. They were just 1,400 yards out. Point-blank range. Bearing mark, he called. Solution set, Captain, replied the torpedo data computer operator. The mechanical brain had calculated the intercept. Fire 1. A heavy hydraulic thump shuddered through the submarine, and the Christmas tree light for Tube 1 flickered from red to green. Fire 2. Another thump. The boat's trim shifted as 3,000 pounds of metal and torpex vanished from the bow. Fire 3. Fire 4. Fire 5. Fire 6. In less than 30 seconds, 6 Mark 14 steam-powered torpedoes were in the water, their propellers churning, leaving a trail of bubbles racing toward the dark giant. All ahead 2/3. Enright ordered, pulling his eyes from the periscope. Rig for deep submergence, rig for silent running. Get us below 400 feet. Now. He didn't need to watch. The stopwatch had started. The sound man, his headphones clamped tight, was the only one who mattered. The crew held their breath, waiting. 55 seconds. First hit, Captain, the sound man yelled, his eyes wide. Loud and clear. Then, in rapid succession, second hit, third hit, fourth hit, all hits, Captain, all 4. 2 of the torpedoes had run erratically, or too deep. A muffled cheer erupted in the control room before Enright silenced it. Quiet in the boat. A new sound was coming through the hull, a low, groaning, tearing sound, the sound of a metal beast dying, and another, more immediate sound, the high-pitched, angry ping-ping-ping of the Japanese destroyers. They were turning, hunting. The first depth charge exploded, a violent, deafening crack that slammed the Archerfish and sent men sprawling. Aboard Shinano, at 3:17, the world ended. The ship was struck by 4 torpedoes, compressed into a 75-foot section of the starboard hull. They hit squarely on the blister, the very armor that was supposed to make the ship invincible. But the theory of her design and the reality of her construction were 2 different things. The impacts were not sharp explosions. They were dull, crushing thuds. A catastrophic, subterranean force that felt less like an attack and more like the ship had collided with an underwater mountain. Men were thrown from their racks. In the engine rooms, lights shattered, and a fine mist of vaporized seawater filled the air as pipes burst. On the bridge, Captain Abe gripped the chart table. The ship lurched, a violent, sickening roll to starboard. "Damage report!" he roared. The reports that came back were nonsense. They were impossible. Flooding in the outer starboard engine room. Massive flooding in boiler room 3. The refrigeration unit is gone. "We have a list, Captain. The list is already 10 degrees. Abe couldn't believe it. This was Shinano. This was a Yamato-class hull. It was designed to absorb a dozen torpedoes and keep fighting. 4 hits, even from the powerful American Mark 14 seconds, should have been a nuisance, easily contained by the ship's massive, honeycombed system of 1,080 watertight compartments. But the shipyard workers had never finished the job. The torpedoes had struck near the keel, at the weakest, deepest point, where the anti-torpedo bulge met the main armor belt. The welding, rushed by civilian crews, was brittle. The steel plates, never properly tested, didn't just bend, they cracked. Worse, the watertight bulkheads that should have contained the flood were useless. Gaskets were missing, rivets popped. Crucial pressure testings had been skipped to meet the launch deadline. Water, black and icy, was not just in the ship, it was moving through the ship, pouring from one secure compartment into the next through unfinished cable passages and unsealed ventilation shafts. The ship's untrained crew, many of whom were seasick and had never participated in a damage control drill, panicked. They ran in the dark, tripping over welding cables and construction debris left in the passageways. They didn't know which valves to turn. They couldn't find the emergency pumps. And the pumps that were found had no power. The list, which should have been minor, steepened. 10 degrees became 12. Then 14. Captain Abe stared at the inclinometer, his face pale. The water was rising faster than his men could even report it. He realized with dawning horror that his unsinkable ship had no systems to fight the flood. He had no trained crew to counterbalance the list. The destroyers Isokaze and Yukikaze were frantically dropping depth charges over the Archerfish's last known position, but Abe barely noticed. His fortress was hollow, and it was sinking under him. November 29th, 1944, 4 hours. Aboard Shinano. The ship is dying. The list to starboard is no longer a problem. It is a fatal, irreversible reality. It has passed 18 degrees. Walking on the main deck is no longer possible. It requires climbing. Down in the ship's vast, dark intestines, the scene is one of primal terror. The icy Pacific, which should have been held back by thousands of tons of armor, is now the ship's new occupant. It pours through unsealed bulkheads with the force of a locomotive. Men not sailors, but welders, electricians, and riveters from the shipyard are trapped in compartments they were still in the process of building. They bang on hatches that will not open, their cries muffled by the roar of the ocean. The few trained sailors are fighting a battle with a ghost. They connect emergency hoses to pumps, only to find the pumps have no steam. They try to manually seal bulkhead doors, only to find the warped steel, stressed by the ship's list, makes it impossible. Captain Abe, his face a mask of grim disbelief, makes a desperate decision. He orders a counterflood, intentionally flooding port-side compartments to try and bring the ship back to an even keel. It is the correct, textbook maneuver. It is also completely useless. The crew cannot find the right valves in the dark. The systems, never tested, fail to operate. The water they do manage to let in is a drop in the ocean compared to the torrent gushing into the starboard side. The list pauses, and then, with a horrifying metallic groan, continues its relentless crawl past 20 degrees. On the bridge, Abe gives his last, desperate order. All engines full, head for the coast, head for Shionomisaki. We will beach her. It is a death sentence. The portside engines are still operational, but the starboard engine rooms are a submerged tomb. When the screws on one side of the ship begin to churn, while the other side is a dead, flooded weight, Shinano does not surge forward. It begins to turn in a great, agonizing circle, its list steepening with every degree of the turn. The forward momentum is only forcing more water into the punctured bow. By 6, the destroyers Yukikaze and Isokaze have abandoned their hunt for the Archerfish, which is now miles away, deep and silent, listening to the cacophony of its victims' destruction. The destroyers pull alongside their dying mothership. Their crews stare in horrified silence. Shinano is a monster, listing at 25 degrees. Its massive, red, anti-fouling paint on the hull is completely exposed, glistening in the first grey light of dawn. The 872-foot flight deck, strong enough to deflect bombs, is now a steep, useless hill. Then, at 6:15, the final blow. In the one remaining, functioning boiler room, the seawater, which has been creeping steadily higher, finally reaches the furnaces. A catastrophic explosion of steam and fire erupts. The generators die. Shinano is plunged into total darkness. The lights on the bridge go out. The internal telephones fall silent. The last operational pumps stop. The ship is no longer a warship. It is 72,000 tons of cold, dead steel, surrendering to the laws of physics. The massive, armored flight deck, its ultimate protection, now becomes its executioner. The top-heavy weight, held at such an extreme angle, provides the final, irresistible leverage that will pull the entire ship over. Captain Abe stands on his dark bridge, gripping a railing. He can feel the ship's slow, final, shuddering surrender. The giant is falling. November 29th, 1944, 7 hours. The sea off Shionomisaki. The sun is rising, casting a sickly grey light on an impossible scene. Shinano is no longer a ship. It is a defeated mountain range, canted over at more than 35 degrees. The order is finally given. Abandon ship. But the command is almost meaningless. There is no orderly evacuation. There are no lifeboats being calmly lowered. It is a desperate, chaotic scramble for survival. Men are crawling, clawing their way up the steep-angled flight deck, which now resembles a sheer cliff face. Others, trapped on the low starboard side, are simply sliding off into the ocean. The water is a churning, 48 degree, 9 degrees Celsius, mass of fuel oil, debris, and dying men. The three destroyers Isokaze, Hamakaze, and the lucky Yukikazire now in a race against death. Their captains steer them perilously close to the capsizing giant, a maneuver that threatens to doom them as well. If Shinano rolls on top of them, or if its sinking creates a vortex, they will be pulled down with it. Sailors on the destroyers throw every rope and cargo net they have over their sides, screaming at the men in the water to grab on. But many of the survivors are civilian shipyard workers, not sailors. They don't know how to climb the nets. They are weak from shock and hypothermia. They clog the water, a mass of hundreds of black bobbing heads. Aboard Shinano, a small group of officers finds Captain Toshio Abe. He is alone on the bridge, which is now tilted at a severe, surreal angle. He is calm. He has locked himself in his sea cabin. Through the bulkhead, they can hear him. He is refusing to leave. Other officers are seen gathering a portrait of the Emperor and tying it to their bodies, a futile attempt to save the ship's honor as they leap into the sea. At 10:17, after 7 hours of its agonizingly slow death, the giant gives up. The list passes 45 degrees. The ship's internal contents boilers, engines, ammunition, and the bodies of the 1,400 men trapped inside break loose. A catastrophic, internal roar is heard by the destroyers, the sound of a 72,000-ton avalanche happening inside a steel hull. Shinano lurches. It rolls completely over. Its massive red-painted keel, a testament to its Yamato-class heritage, rises toward the sky. The 4 bronze propellers, each 19 feet tall, lift from the water and hang in the air for one final, defiant moment. Then, at 10:57 a.m., with a sound like a volcanic eruption, the sea pressure crushes the unflooded compartments. The bow rears up, and Shinano begins its final, vertical plunge. It slides beneath the waves, surprisingly fast. Within 2 minutes, the largest warship ever built has vanished, leaving behind nothing but a vast, black stain of oil and 1,000 struggling men. Captain Toshio Abe is gone. 1,435 sailors, cadets, and civilian workers are gone. On the bridge of the Yukikaze, her crew pulls a near-frozen Shinano lookout from the water. The man is shivering, in shock, his eyes vacant. He is handed a rice ball and hot tea. He just stares at the empty, swirling patch of water where his fortress used to be. The destroyers, now rescue ships, have 1,080 survivors on their decks. The secret is out. The Japanese Navy has just suffered a defeat so total, so embarrassing, it will be classified as a state secret. But 3,000 miles away, another group of men is celebrating. November 29th, 1944, 11 hours, 400 feet beneath the waves. For nearly 8 hours, the USS Archerfish had been a steel coffin. Commander Joseph Enright and his crew had endured the hell of a sustained depth charge attack. The destroyers Isokaze and Hamakaze had bracketed them, dropping dozens of charges. The submarine's hull had rung like a tuning fork, popping gauges, shattering light bulbs, and rattling the nerves of every man aboard. They were deep, silent, and hunted. But at 4:30, the sound man, his headphones pressed so hard they hurt his ears, had reported a new sound. Not an explosion, not a propeller. It was a low, catastrophic groaning. The sound of immense pressure, of bulkheads collapsing, of a giant tearing itself apart. Then, at 11 hours after the sinking, the destroyer's propellers faded, heading east. The hunt was over. Periscope depth, Enright ordered, his voice hoarse. Slowly. The boat angled up, rising from the cold, dark safety of the deep. Enright put his eye to the optics. He did a full 360-degree sweep. The ocean was empty. The destroyers were gone. His target was gone. All that remained was a colossal, shimmering patch of black fuel oil, miles wide, and a scattering of wooden debris. "Surface the boat," Enright said, a strange calm in his voice. The thump of the ballast tanks blowing and the rush of fresh, salty air onto the bridge was a resurrection. Enright and his officers stood on the conning tower, breathing deep, staring at the massive, oily grave. They had done it. They had sunk it. But what was it? "Well, Joe," his exec said, "you sank the biggest goddamn thing I've ever seen." Enright went below to the radio room. He had to file his patrol report. This was the moment of truth. He had fired 6 torpedoes and seen 4 hits. He had sunk, by his estimation, a brand new carrier. He calculated the tonnage based on its impossible length. The number was too big. He knew what naval intelligence would do with a report like that. They'd laugh him out of the room. No one builds a carrier that big. It was bigger than any battleship. It had to be a mistake. So, he did the only sensible thing a commander could do. He lied. He filed a report claiming the sinking of a 28,000-ton Yamato-class, the U.S. designation for Hyo-class aircraft carrier. A significant kill, to be sure, but a plausible one. He couldn't bring himself to write, "sank a 72,000-ton leviathan," because he knew it would be dismissed as battle fatigue. When Archerfish pulled into port in Guam on December 15th, the crew was met with a brass band. They were heroes. Enright was recommended for the Navy Cross, but naval intelligence was skeptical. "Commander," an analyst said, holding Enright's report, "your tonnage is ambitious. We've reviewed the data. The Japs don't have a carrier of that class in that area." In the end, the official naval credit for his patrol was a downgrade. They credited Archerfish with sinking nothing, or perhaps damaged a cruiser. The report was filed away. The impossible kill was dismissed by his own side. Enright and his crew knew they had sunk a giant, but for the rest of the war, they were the only ones who believed it. Back in Tokyo, the silence was absolute. The sinking of Shinano was so swift, so complete, and so catastrophically embarrassing that the Imperial High Command classified the event. The 1,080 survivors were not hailed as heroes. They were interned on the island of Mitsu, their mail censored, their movements restricted, forbidden from speaking of the sinking to anyone, including their families, under penalty of death. For the Japanese, the ship had never existed. For the Americans, the sinking had never happened. The greatest, shortest-lived battleship in history had become a ghost, its end a secret, shared only by the victors who were not believed and the survivors who were not allowed to speak. It was not until August 1945, after the mushroom clouds had risen over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the ghost of Shinano finally materialized. When Allied intelligence officers began the monumental task of sifting through the wreckage of the Japanese Empire, they found the files. They found the ship's plans, the construction logs, and the after-action reports from the Yukikaze's captain, and they were stunned. The Americans had known about hull number 110, the third Yamato sister. They had assumed, correctly, that Midway had forced its conversion. But they had believed it was still under construction, rotting in its dry dock, or perhaps destroyed by the B-29 raids. They never, in their wildest estimations, believed it had been completed. They never believed it had sailed. The truth was almost comical in its tragedy. Shinano, the most powerful warship ever built, a 72,000-ton armored fortress, had been at sea for a total of 17 hours on its maiden voyage before a single, prowling American submarine found it. And then, the analysts went back to the rejected patrol reports. They found the log of the USS Archerfish. They found Commander Joseph Enright's exaggerated claim of a 28,000-ton carrier. They matched the date, November 29th, 1944. They matched the location, just off Shionomisaki. Enright hadn't been exaggerating. He had been conservative. The man who had been denied his kill was suddenly, retroactively, one of the greatest submarine aces of the war. His 4 torpedoes, 4 simple Mark I 4 Shad, accomplished what entire carrier task forces had been designed to do. They had slain a super battleship. The post-mortem revealed just how disastrous Shinano's design and hurried construction had been. The invincible armor, the unsealed bulkheads, the untrained crewit, was a ship that was designed to be unsinkable, but built to be sunk. Its very systems, intended for a battleship's resilience, were too complex for the carrier conversion, leaving fatal gaps in its defenses. Today, Shinano remains a legend. Not for what it did, but for what it was. It is the largest warship in history to be sunk by a submarine. Its story is not one of epic battle, but of catastrophic, fatal irony. It was a paper leviathan, a hollow giant, a testament to the desperate, failing days of an empire. And for the 1,435 men who went down with it, and for the crew of the Archerfish who sank it, Shinano will forever be the impossible ghost that rose from a secret dry dock, only to be swallowed by the dark, cold waters of the Pacific, sunk by just 4 torpedoes.